she started jumping and dancing around and pumping her fist in the air, which was criticized uniformly by serious commentators in Japan who said this is not how a Japanese prime minister should behave. She's more like a cheerleader for America than a statesperson. She didn't care. She is that much of a pro-American leader.
The new Japanese Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, is so pro-Donald Trump that she's become known as the Trump Whisperer. She's also just gained an enormous amount of power over the weekend in a historic landslide election win. So what will this do to Australia if, as predicted, she encourages Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to strengthen our ties with the United States? Today, international and political editor Peter Hartcher on how Australia manages this new relationship with the Japanese Prime Minister while heeding calls to decouple from the United States. Okay, you've got to tell me about this historic landslide that Japan's first female prime minister secured just over the weekend. How did Sanae Takaichi manage this, and what powers does this now give her to make serious changes, perhaps, to how Japan behaves in the world?
Well, she not only smashed all tradition by becoming the first female prime minister of Japan when her party first voted her into that position 3 months ago, she then proceeded to smash all records for the size of a government majority in Japan since World War II. So she's won. The polls said she would probably win and win big. They didn't predict that she would win more than 2/3 of the entire lower house of Japan's parliament.
The future is not something that is simply given to us. It is something we build through continued efforts and challenges, each and every one of us.
So that gives her a lot of power. It means that she doesn't have to worry about what the opposition thinks in the lower house. She can just steamroller them. It also means she can overrule the upper house with the 2/3, or they call it supermajority. The upper house becomes irrelevant. So she can make law with a free hand, unhindered by the opposition in either chamber. The other power it gives her is to launch the process, but not actually to achieve the outcome, of revising Japan's peacetime pacifist constitution, which famously renounces war for all time and the ability to wage war, meaning no defense forces. It gives her that ability to at least begin the process, but you still need to go through steps, including a national referendum and a 2/3 majority. So that's still a distant prospect. But these are the powers that are now on her desk.
That's incredible. And I am particularly interested in, this potential reform to the country's pacifist constitution. I know we've spoken about this before. It's been in place since 1947. So obviously this would be a massive change. And I guess how could this change the game completely in terms of how Japan engages with China? Because we know that she recently made comments suggesting that Japan could intervene in a conflict over Taiwan. So that could be a military conflict with China potentially. And this, of course, had massive ramifications. So tell us about this, Peter.
Yes, so you've hit the nail on the head. This is why Takaichi's victory, and in such fine style, is a major geopolitical moment. So in terms of, first of all, just let's deal with the constitution question, and then let's talk about the Japan-China relationship, because Takaichi is determined to stand up to China. She doesn't see Japan as in any way being inferior and sees Japan as a great power that will confront China with US help and with Australia's help as well. On the constitutional question, Japanese governments for decades now have, rather than try to confront that very thorny question of a constitutional revision, rather incrementally tried to creep their way around it and succeeded to some extent by gradually building up Japan's military forces and gradually, incrementally changing the laws that control how they can use those forces. So it's come to the point now where through incrementalism over the last 50 years or so, Japan is spending about 2% of its GDP on its military, the same as Australia, and it's built up a substantial capability, including one of the world's biggest navies. It's about the number 4 or 5 military spender in the world, simply because of the scale of its economy. It remains the world's 4th biggest economy. Still, it come down from the 80s and 90s when it was the 2nd biggest, but nonetheless, it's a substantial economic power. So it's built these forces and incrementally liberalized the laws under which it can engage those powers. So whether Takaichi decides it's worth the trouble to try and actually change the constitution and take that huge political risk, or whether to continue this incrementalism, we will have to wait and see. But it was on exactly this subject that she brought on a confrontation with China. She became the first Japanese prime minister clearly to state that any contingency or Chinese move against Taiwan, she said, would be an existential issue facing Japan. It would determine whether Japan could survive as a nation state. And therefore, she said, it would trigger the law that allows Japan to deploy its military forces in mutual self-protection, self-defense. So this is the beginning of the ruction with China. She said it unapologetically. Xi Jinping, the Chinese Communist Party, reared up in tremendous indignation, imposed trade sanctions, cancelled the Chinese tourist trade to Japan, banned Chinese rare earths sales to Japan, and other sanctions as well. She didn't apologize. She didn't take a step back. And this is now where the situation stands. A newly elected, newly empowered, very determined, very tough nationalist leading Japan with tremendous popular support and stating that she will confront China's expansionist inclinations.
Which I guess, we could see come to a head, later this year, because China's going to be hosting the APEC summit in November, and I guess Takaichi and Xi Jinping could meet then. But I think we really are getting to the crux of your piece, which is why, her win really marks what you've called a geopolitical earthquake. And I wanted to talk to you or ask you more about why she doesn't think Japan is a middle power. She thinks it's a great power. Can you sort of elaborate on that?
Yes, she doesn't see Japan as having to be an endless price taker in world power and alliance relationships. She sees a Japan that can be a price maker. She sees a Japan that can return to its previous greatness as a force in the world. So Japan, of course, has a history of being a country that muddles along until some savage crisis is upon it, and then it has a history of being able to reorganize very quickly and reconstitute itself. The Meiji Restoration of 1868, for example, Japan was a poor agrarian feudal society until all the pressure from the European colonial powers, the US, the Japanese just decided as an act of political will that they had to be competitive, and they did. The next major reorganization really was after World War II, when it defeated, occupied, and its economy smashed to pieces with comprehensive Allied, mainly US, bombing of all its manufacturing infrastructure, all its infrastructure. And it did, in short order, by the 1960s, was a major exporting powerhouse, and the rest we know is history. By the 1980s, it was being acclaimed as a great power. There were very, very excited books being written by Americans predicting a war between Japan and the US. There were serious proposals from Japanese politicians that Japan should buy the state of California from the US because Japan needed more land. This was the sort of hubris and headiness that was going on in the 80s. And then, of course, after its bubble economy punctured in 89, it's really become an overlooked country and a forgotten land in a lot of ways, unless you're interested in a holiday or going skiing. But it's really been overlooked, and she wants to bring it back. Of course, at the end of World War II, Japan, like many countries, subcontracted its defense and national security to the US. She wants to bring that back. She wants to remain a powerful ally. She says, I want to make Japan an indispensable ally to the US. But she wants Japan to be a great power in its own right, as it has been in the past, and she can see that happening again. Japan now is located in the middle of the fighting zone. The Chinese expansionist envelope, the threat envelope, if you like, has expanded to put Japan squarely in the center. And it's been under military pressure, continuous encroachments from China's Navy and Air Force now for years, to the point where it has to scramble its Air Force an average of every 1.5 days to cut off an incursion of Chinese Air Force jets. And now Japan is the front line, and that's how Takaichi sees it. And she sees it as being a firm line in the alliance that will do everything it can to confront China.
Well, this is so interesting what you say about Takaichi wanting to, develop an even stronger alliance with the United States, because this, of course, completely flies in the face of the message that we've been hearing, and it's been analyzed almost ad nauseum over the last few weeks, ever since Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney gave what is now a famous speech at the World Economic Forum at Davos last month. And this is, of course, when he said that middle powers should decouple from countries that seek to dominate them. He didn't mention the United States, but it was clearly who he was referring to. So Takaichi, it seems like, she's known as the Trump whisperer. She's completely taking a different tack, quite an opposite tack, I would suggest. So what does this mean, I guess, in terms of how she might relate to Donald Trump?
Yeah, it's a different view altogether. And the two countries, Japan and Canada, are under different pressures, of course, although both of them are long-standing and close US allies that have relied heavily on the US. What's happened under Trump, of course, is that he has punched Canada right in the face and said he wants to annex the entire country. They share a border. The US is militarily way superior. So this is a live threat that Trump poses against Canada's existence as an independent nation state. But Japan's also a country of 130 million people with an enormous economy. It's by any definition is out of reach for domination by the US. So Takaichi also is a conservative leader, a woman, and somebody who's been positive about Trump from the beginning. Trump has responded lovingly. Trump has complimented her many times on her strength, her grace.
I want to just let you know, anytime you have any question, any doubt, anything you want, any favors you need, anything I can do to help Japan, we will be there. We are an ally at the strongest level.
When he visited Japan after she was elected prime minister by her party, but before the general election, they went together to a US aircraft carrier and stood on the deck, and Trump said positive things about her and Japan.
This woman, that's right. This woman is a winner. So, we've become very close friends all of a sudden because their stock market today and our stock market today hit an all-time high. That means we're doing something right.
And she started jumping and dancing around and pumping her fist in the air, which was criticized uniformly by serious commentators in Japan who said this is not how a Japanese prime minister should behave. She's more like a cheerleader for America than a statesperson. She didn't care. She is that much of a pro-American leader and pro-Trump, and he is unabashedly pro-her, congratulated her on her big election win the other day, and she replied by saying, our alliance is limitless. So she sees the alliance as being as strong or stronger than it's ever been, and Japan as a bigger, more active participant in the alliance. Very different to the Carney approach of wanting to decouple, to hedge against the US, and to hedge against the US by building stronger relationships with other powers. Witness his visit to China just a couple of weeks ago. No Canadian Prime Minister had been there for, 8-9 years. Carney was very demonstratively saying to the US, look, we have options. We can go to China as our partner if you're not going to be any use to us. Takaichi doesn't have that option. So that's an explanation of the fundamental standing and why those two US allies, or erstwhile US allies in the case of Canada, are going in different directions.
Okay, well, I really want to ask you what sort of pressure I guess this might put on Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, because we've been hearing some commentary within our own country. I know that Alex Bristow from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, he just told the Australian Financial Review that Sanae Takaichi's visit to Washington in March is a vital opportunity for Japan, Australia, and other US allies to persuade Trump not to make a grand bargain with Chinese President Xi Jinping when he visits Beijing in April. And you wrote that Mike Green, the political analyst, told you that, Takaichi might very well encourage Albanese to sort of, I guess, encourage Trump to get things happening on the trade front and sort of, I guess, strengthen that alliance. So how receptive might Anthony Albanese be to encouragement from Japan to perhaps strengthen the alliance with the United States and Donald Trump?
Yes, good point, good question. Australia and the US are not only going to have that bilateral relationship, and Takaichi, of course, as you said, will be involved and wanting to bring Australia in. And remember that in the last couple of years, Australia's relationship with Japan has been intensified. It's now Australia's secondary ally. But also remember that there is this forum called the Quad, which in its current leader form was created by Takaichi's mentor, Abe Shinzo, former Japanese Prime Minister. And she is very enthusiastic about using the Quad to advance Japan's case. The Quad is Japan, the US, Australia, and India. And she intends to use that as a forum for bringing the US, as you say, to the priorities that suit her and the other Quad members. And they will include being firmer with China, being more reasonable with trade and tariffs and less aggressive with US allies with tariffs, to engage more with Southeast Asia and India. So it will be like a little posse of allies that does try to work on Trump. And I think we can expect that. To your question, how receptive will Albanese be? I think the answer is very.
Okay, that's very interesting, because you've just mentioned there that Australia and Japan, their relationship as allies has intensified over the last couple of years. But I've noticed with great interest that in the last few months, it seems like our government has also grown closer to the Canadian government. In October, our two countries signed something of an agreement or of an understanding on critical minerals to collaborate there in some capacity. Albanese, of course, has invited Mark Carney to speak at our parliament, which he'll be doing next month. And in November, the president of the Canadian Border Services Agency signed a customs mutual assistance agreement with our Commissioner of Border Force to sort of strengthen information sharing and hopefully prevent smuggling and trade-related crime. So I guess, could this wedge Albanese, if Canada's trying to perhaps push us to decouple from the United States and Japan is pushing us to strengthen our ties to America, could this put Albanese in an uncomfortable position?
Yeah, interesting angle. And on Canada, very early in Carney's term, he cancelled a Canadian order for F-35 fighter jets from the US. And instead, he turned to Australia, not for fighter jets, but he signed a deal with Albanese to buy Australia's over-the-horizon radar for something like $6 billion. It was a very clear sign. We're not going to buy from you guys anymore. We'd prefer to buy from the Australians or anybody else, as long as it's not the US. So I think what Carney is doing is diversifying his sources of armaments, but also relationships, and in every way he can. And that's a rational response for a Canadian leader. But I don't think he's going to be in a position to pressure Australia to do anything in particular, except to intensify its relationship with Canada. He's there to extract maximum benefits for Canada. In the case of Albanese, while subtly wanting to diversify in any way he can from the US, is not in a position to be so forthright or direct as to start cancelling defence or strategic arrangements with the US, even if it's only for the AUKUS submarine and technology deal, which weds the two countries together for decades in a major strategic compact. Also note that Trump has been prepared to welcome the Australian alliance and hasn't yet insulted Australia. So it's a different situation, and Australia will, while trying to work its way around problems with the US, also try to salvage whatever it can from the US alliance, because we are an exposed country that cannot resist on its own Chinese pressure and needs the US to be standing in between us and China if we have any hope of resisting Chinese coercion in the years ahead.
That's interesting what you say, Peter, about Canada then not probably wanting to coerce or encourage Australia too much to go over to its side in terms of how it relates to Trump. And I wonder if Albanese will perhaps be inspired by the new Japanese Prime Minister, who doesn't think Japan is a middle power, but thinks it's a great power. What's the chance that our government could ever get to the same view of ourselves?
Well, 2 points, Samantha. One is that I think Albanese will do, in part, exactly what Carney's doing, looking for other sources of partnership, strength, wherever he can. And he's been very active. He was in Indonesia just last week, signing a new mutual defence agreement. You'll see him doing much more travel. There's a major trip coming up, which they haven't announced yet. But at the same time, he'll be doing what Takaichi is doing. He'll be doing what both of them are doing, and that is to intensify the US relationship where he can and where it's to Australia's mutual benefit, and to salvage what he can. So he'll be trying to do basically everything and anything that Australia can to bolster its exposed position under increasing coercive pressure from China. As to whether Australia can get its mindset and its ambition from being middle to great, as well as having the wherewithal, terrific question, Samantha. Terrific question. I do have views about this, but I think it's a subject for an entire podcast on its own.
Oh, I so look forward to that. You know, I'm obsessed with this topic. I know it's a mutual obsession. So we'll leave that for now. But thank you so much, Peter, for your time.
Always a pleasure, Samantha.